Hi guys! This video is really special because I have Sir Psycho helping me out. He's a great narrator and has loads of scary stories on his channel. So at the end of this video, be sure to go and check him out and give him some love. The link to his channel is in the description below. So without further ado, let's begin.
This story didn't happen to me, but a friend of my family. To be specific, my father's friend from his teen years. I didn't believe them the first time they told me, but years after experiencing my supernatural events, I don't have any reason not to. Just a little background. My father and his friend, who I will name John just for privacy, used to be interested in demonic and satanic things like music, symbols, and even so far as to attempting to make contact with otherworldly beings. I'm not a religious or spiritual person, but something about this story gives me the chills recalling it. My father told me one day him and John were trying to talk to demons. Yes, not just spirits, but beings claiming to be actual demons. According to both of them, they were messing around with one of those Ouija boards, calling dark beings in my dad's old house in East LA. They said nothing really scary happened, and they actually enjoyed talking to the so-called demon until the one they spoke to in the end of the session. See, John said to my dad that they should try to reach a spirit that has been known to them in their research in the darkness of the unknown. I honestly don't remember what they said it was called, but I remember it started with a Z. They said they asked it many questions about the past, present, and future. They never told exactly what they were asking this being, but what they told me about the events right after they said goodbye. My father said as soon as it said goodbye, he heard something moving in his backyard. John and my dad got scared, most likely from the energy surrounding them. My father, always being the one with a curious mind, even till this day, wanted to see what was causing the noise. Him and John, walking quietly to the back door while getting closer, were able to hear clearly what the noise was. Each step made the movement sound like rocking and creaking. Right as my dad grasped the handle of the back door, they heard a sound that a horse would make while riding around. Both of them now creeped out, but now confused and more curious than ever. They opened the door and slowly walked out of the doorway. My father was the first one to notice it. He said that as he laid his eyes on it, chills ran up his whole body. What he saw was an old toddler's rocking horse his family had for years. Yes, an old vintage rocking horse gave my father and John chills. It wasn't the rocking horse that scared them, but how it changed from the way they knew how it looked. To them, the horse's eyes were a glowing blood red, staring directly at them, that were always a dark brown to my dad, while it rocked slowly without any signs of slowing down, just a constant rock. They both turned back and locked the door as fast as they could. That was the first time my father said he had been through that, but it continued for 5 months around the same time every night. Though it creeped him out, but never anything too scary or harmful occurred, until the incident that happened to John the day after the rocking horse suddenly stopped the creepy events. My father was the first to tell me about it. I later asked John to make sure my dad wasn't just messing with me, but he also told me the exact same story. The story went as follows. One night, John and his girlfriend were talking on the phone, like they did every night, just about random subjects and daily duties. At some point, they started talking about the supernatural and the unknown. It was a very normal conversation to them. According to John's girlfriend, John was acting strange and somewhat paranoid, talking about the subject that night. This story is from John's girlfriend's point of view. She said that slowly she started to hear voices from multiple beings that started as distant whispers. She asked John if anyone else was home with him or in the same room, but John said no one was home with him, but he felt like he was being watched. As John kept talking about how he had been feeling strange, since him and my father first seen the horse rocking. His girlfriend said the distant whispers began to get louder and louder, to a point that she thought it was a prank. John, my dad, and another friend were pulling on her. Yet every time she asked John about the voices, he swore he didn't hear them. Till this day, he denies hearing any voices, just the feeling of eyes on him and a deep, dark energy around him. John's girlfriend kept hearing the voices get louder than John himself. She wasn't able to hear John at all anymore, just multiple voices talking fast, and what didn't sound like English nor Spanish, the only languages they both knew. Scared out of her mind, she hung up and called the police to be sent to John's house. She told them about what happened before John's voice stopped. She drove to John's house to make sure he was all right. As she drove up, the police and ambulance were entering the house. She waited outside for news of John. When she saw the paramedics pushing a stretcher toward the house, her heart dropped and fear rose. Less than 5 minutes later, they were pushing him out with a pump to help him breathe. She ran to see him to make sure he was all right. The police stopped her feet before she got to him and asked why she was running towards him. She told them she's the person who called them to check on him and took a statement from her. After they told her that she might have saved his life, when he wasn't answering, they broke down the door and found John on the floor convulsing like a seizure when holding the phone in his hand still. John was perfectly fine after he woke the next day, but didn't remember much from the night before. The paramedics that helped him said he had a seizure, but very mild and minor harm was done to him. They also said they estimate he was having it for 15 minutes after being touched by one of the paramedics on scene. I'm glad to say John or my dad has never been through anything else as scary, and both are in good health. I don't know if I believe them, but the way they speak of those times with such fear, regret, and worriness in their voices, it's kind of hard not to believe them.
The date of the event is 6/12/16, and it's very late in the evening, like 2 a.m. or so. I'm in my driveway with a friend who's also a neighbour, and we are talking to one another and about to call it a night. Now, in my neighbourhood, everyone knows everyone. Everyone's kids play together and everyone socialises with one another. And as we are talking, this odd sound comes from across the street. We both immediately stop talking and look directly at where the sound comes from. A woman is getting up from the ground of my neighbour's sidewalk. "Who is that?" my friend asks. "I don't know. I've never seen her. Did she just fall?" I say. We are watching this woman, who looks Hispanic, come out of nowhere. It looked like she came out of the ground. My friend said he didn't hear her coming down the street, and neither did I. Which is difficult where I live, not to hear someone coming down the street. We watched her walk from that point down the sidewalk, and she didn't make any noise. She kept her head down, and she had something in her hand, like keys. I told my friend that by the way she walked, she seemed sad. We continued to watch her walk, and she must have moved about 30 feet down the sidewalk when she suddenly stops. She stood there long enough for my friend to say that she moved like a zombie, and it would be eerie if she disappeared. She then turns to the right towards the wooden fence, and then just vanished into thin air. Just like that, she was gone. She was underneath the streetlight. I saw it as clear as day. She didn't walk around the corner or go through the gate, because that was impossible. There was no entrance from their fence at that point, and we would have seen her turn the corner, because she wasn't at the corner yet. I couldn't believe my eyes. Who or what did I just see? Was that what I think it was? I looked at my friend with this confused look on my face, and we analysed what we just saw with common sense. "I can't explain it," I said. "She was a ghost." I'm a 32-year-old man, yet it is broad daylight as I write this post, because what I am about to share haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about it, or in this case typing the memory, is enough to send chills through my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I have only told this story to a handful of people over the past 10 years because of how terrifying an experience it was for me, but I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share with others. Maybe you have some similar experiences that you can share, so please let me know. To tell this story and give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter this post is about. Buckle up, this will be a long post, but definitely not boring. My name is Joshua, but I will change the names to protect the privacy of the others involved in this story. I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, we will call him Bob, wanted to take me and my wife around some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150. Bob was driving a 1980-something white Celebrity. It was really a piece of crap vehicle. Anywho, it was late dusk, becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car and he took us around the area, first to an old abandoned house. But other than some raccoons rustling around it, it was a 2-hour waste of time. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted, again a bust. Then an old church that was run down and supposed to be haunted, once again, yawn. At this point, it was getting close to midnight and my wife and I were getting pretty bored. I spoke up to Bob, saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees, in daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in the picture, to which I replied no. He took the picture back and said, "That's because there isn't, and there are no power lines either." About this time he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. Then after that it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. Nothing to light the night except the full moon above and the clear starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field and wooded hillside was. He looked at his cell phone. Both his phone and mine had no signal. This was in 2003 and this area had no cell towers. But he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57 and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even in complete darkness I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by and nothing has changed. Then at exactly midnight, a small light flickers on in the middle of the hillside. A chill runs down my spine as my wife, Bob, his girlfriend, and me watch this small light, which to me looked like an old kerosene lantern, as it began to move, swaying back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, when I finally spoke and asked what the story was with this. Bob replied that he didn't know, but locals had told him that at midnight every night this lantern will light up and sway back and forth through the woods until the sun comes up, and then it disappears. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything could scare me or hurt me, so since there were no houses around, I yelled, "We see you! Wow, you're so scary with your little lantern." Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth and moving down the hillside to a field at an unhuman pace. Gliding, it began to spread across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was, because within seconds we were in the car and flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent until Bob spoke up, saying that he forgot to put gas in earlier and the only store around is closed. So if we decided to go back out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning, as he had only about half a quarter tank. I said okay, and a few minutes later we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. We told her we had brought some snacks, but she said she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, he asked if we could take my truck to the next town over to get some food, because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us to that town. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded on into my truck. I turned the key, and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would think that the alternator was out. This was strange, and after the night we had, it made us all feel uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood, pulled Bob's car around to the front and attempted to jump my truck with his car. This is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connected the jumper cables to his battery and mine, his girlfriend starts his car, and within seconds the cables between the connectors start to smoke, and in a flash of fire they burn up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob runs and turns off his car, and we take the clamps off our batteries. We look at each other in the eerie moon and starlit night. Did I mention there were no light poles around? Well, there weren't. We both get a bad feeling at the exact same time as we suddenly realise we had been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It was a motorboat. Now, like I said, this was the time of year. It was starting to get cold, especially at night. We were bundled up as it was, and were standing still on land at night, but somebody was out in a boat after midnight? When it had to be chilly as all would get out with the wind hitting them. And from the sounds of this motor it was going pretty fast. But we saw nothing. That is, until the boat was about 50 yards away and a very bright spotlight comes on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I tell the women to get in his car and lock the doors. I reach into the bed of my truck and give Bob a tyre tool and pick up another. I work in a tyre shop and had all kinds of tools of the trade in my truck. We are standing in front of the vehicles in the middle, the hoods up on both, as the boat pulls up to the dock, and two heavily bearded men in their 30s to 40s step out of the boat and walk up. It's hard to give an accurate description, as their spotlight was still pointed at us, and it covered the men in an early shadow whilst blinding Bob and I. They look at us and our vehicles, and one glance in the direction of the car at the women, then back at us, and let out a small chuckle. "You fellas got some sort of car trouble?" one asks as he lights his cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with the cigarette sniffs the air and looks down between Bob and my feet and sees the still smoking stack of ashes, or what was the jumper cables. "Looks like it was more than your pussy jumper cables could handle. You all need some help? We got some tools on the boat that I think can fix you guys' problems right up." Then the other man, who had chuckled in the beginning, says, "Fix them right up." I am speechless at this moment, probably with my mouth hanging open. I can't remember. As the two men walk back to their boat, and we hear what sounds like chains rattling around as we try to make out what they are doing. But the spotlight is so blinding we can barely see. But the chain noise was enough. Bob looked at me, and without saying a word, we both jumped in his car and drove the fuck out of there. For the next 3 hours we drove to a populated area, which there weren't many of in the rural area. We were pretty much stuck in, since we had very little fuel. But we all sat in the car, mostly quiet, looking around in all directions, in near panic, thinking at any time those men would find us. Bob would turn his lights on every now and then, thinking he had seen some movement in the dark. After a while the women fell asleep, and Bob and I talked about how weird this whole ordeal had been, and he laughed, saying, "I told you it would be a scary night. I just didn't know it would be this sort of scary." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't even the main thing freaking me out. But the men never showed up, and eventually the morning was on its way, and it was about 20 minutes until sunrise, and Bob asked if I wanted to go and see if the lantern really disappears at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas, and he said yeah. The local store opens up in about an hour, so we'll be fine. I tell him in that case yes. We wake the women and drive back up to the hillside. We get there with about 4 minutes left until sunrise. We see the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looks at me and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips, and we all watch in wonder as right at sunrise the lantern... Bob looks at me and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips, and we all watch in wonder as right at sunrise the lantern slowly fades away to nothing. After this we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling safer now. When we get there, there is no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck is still up and the doors are still locked. On a whim, I tell Bob I'm going to try and start the truck one more time before he drives us somewhere where I can get a cell signal and call for help. And I'll be damned, the truck starts right up with no hesitation or problem. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigating in this area to others, and swearing that we never wanted to come back to this area and run into the boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I hadn't seen in almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says he has a proposition for me. He goes on to tell me he has a group of people, including himself, of course, and the others are Wiccans, and they go out and do seances in haunted places, and they asked me if I would be willing to film their session in the haunted places for their records, and that they would pay me well for my services. I am no Wiccan, but I have always loved the paranormal, even after what I went through at Sugar Loaf. I still had an itch to scratch, and when it came to getting scared and dealing with the paranormal and the unknown, I told him yes, I would love to film for them, but I had no interest in joining in with what was going on. But that I was okay with watching and just getting to be out there looking into the paranormal again. So of course the next question was, when and where are we going to be doing this first? When he answered me, I got a terrible gut feeling, and I wished so much that I had trusted my gut and told him I changed my mind. "Remember that lantern light out near Sugar Loaf?" he asked me, as if there was any way I could ever forget. Yeah, I stammered. "Why do you ask?" I told my group the story, and they want to do a ritual there and see if we can contact the spirit and find out why it was there and what it wants, Bob replies. "I don't know, man," I said. "Oh, come on, Josh. Trust me, you will be safe, and I'm going to pay you $250 just to sit there and film it," he retorted. At the time, I was about to become a father, and money was tight because diapers, formula, and the like cost a small fortune. Not to mention it was my first kid, and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy spending money on not just necessities, but also buying top-of-the-line baby products like toys, crib, playpen, baby monitor, stroller, car seat, a combination pack, and a play changing table, diaper genie, and designer baby clothes. So because my wife was putting us in the poorhouse, I had to weigh out my fear of the area he wanted me to go back to with how important it was I make all the extra money I could. So against my better judgment, I accepted the offer, and a week later I was in the same beat-down celebrity Bob was driving 3 years before. This time, with Bob and 2 guys and 1 girl that were complete strangers to me. They were each dressed very gothic-like and had these pentagram necklaces or something of the sort. It was 11:50 when we got there, and the four of them sat in a tight circle, and I was behind them to the right, about 5 feet from the barbed fence that was in front of the field that led to the hillside, and my back was to the hillside, and bushes at the fence line. And I was filming my friends circle as they started chanting something. So I've been typing this entire post. I've been getting knots in my stomach, knowing that I was coming to this part of the story. This part of the story haunts my dreams and even waking hours to this day. I am going to do my best to describe how the following events unfolded, though I know mere words cannot do justice to the pure terror that ensued, or how horribly horrific the events sounded and were. So when reading or listening to this, turn your imagination all the way up, and believe me when I say, up to this point in my life, I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting, or getting myself spooked, or whatever, but after this night, I have never looked at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore. I show it respect and stay as far away as possible. As much as I dread it, I will now finish telling this story. As his group is chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle of them and opens up some sort of book. It's not like a scary antique spell book or anything. It looks like a newer hardcover. Anyway, he starts reciting words from it, and then looks at his phone, and he tells the group to be quiet and look at the hill. I turn the camera, and at midnight on the dot, the lantern appears. One member of Bob's group blurts out, "Cool!" I roll my eyes, since the way these people were dressed and the way they carried themselves, the word cool didn't seem to fit in their vocabulary. Then Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turn my back to the light and begin to film the group as they begin chanting again, and Bob reads from the book. Then they start asking questions in the hope the spirit will respond. About this time, a wind picks up and Bob's candle goes out. He tells everyone to hold on and tells me cut the camera for a minute. And I oblige and stop recording and watch Bob as he tries his lighter. Then 2 lighters from his group, but none of the lighters are working. I'm sitting down watching the group when I start hearing a rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving the camera on the ground, and spin around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with their candle and lighter problems. As I spin around, I am blinded by the brightest light I have ever seen. What I believe was the lantern up close and personal. But as quick as it appears, the light is gone, and the lantern is nowhere to be seen. If it had been the lantern that blinded me, it had moved from the hillside across the field to right behind me, with me not realising within the span of maybe 30 seconds. I look around for the lantern on the hillside, and nothing. It's only 12:15 or so, and the light has always stayed until sunrise. At this moment the wind quits blowing, and I hear Bob's lighter finally flick. I see it light up, and I mutter, "Guys, did you see that?" They all turn and ask what I am talking about, but before I can answer them, we were all stopped dead in our tracks by a distant laughter coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere all around us. But distant, at the moment, like far off, and this is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, maybe thousands of children, that haunts me to this very moment. As I type this, I am looking around the room I'm in. Whenever I think or talk about this experience, I can vividly remember that terrifying sound and hear it in my head. Also, it just occurred to me that if you put the letter S at the beginning of laughter, it spells slaughter. Ugh, why did I just think that? The best way I can describe this laughter for you is to imagine listening to a large group of kids singing "Row, row, row your boat." You know how one kid will start, and seconds later another will join in, starting at the beginning of the song, so on and so forth. Well, this sounded like hundreds or thousands of children laughing, as if one would start laughing, and seconds later another would, and the pattern went on in an endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like the song "Row, row your boat." I'm saying they laughed in unison, just like kids do when they sing "Row, row your boat." One would start, then seconds later another would, and then another, and the laughter was getting closer and louder. There was sinister laughing, goofy laughing, giggling, all around us, coming from all directions. I was shaking. I could not move. I was spinning around and around, looking off into the distance. This couldn't be real. This sort of thing does not happen. What the fuck is happening? I scream at Bob and his group that we need to get the fuck out of there, but they are already all running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candle behind, and without hesitation I run after them and jump in the car just as the laughter is becoming deafening. We haul ass out of there and drive about a mile up the road and pull over as Bob is in no condition to drive as we're all freaking out. We all get out of the car, pacing around the car, asking each other if we really just heard what we just heard. I tell Bob that I'm sorry, but I left his camera behind. He says he does not care and that he isn't going back for it. At this point, I got on my hands and knees, panting, trying to catch my breath, as I have never in my life been so terrified. That is when all of our chatter stops, as once again we hear laughter off in the distance, very quietly at first, but slowly getting closer and closer and louder, until once again it is becoming deafening. We jump back in the car and speed away. We drive about 6 miles, and for the first 3 miles we can still hear the laughter in the distance with our windows down a little. We all begin to calm a little by mile 4, when the laughter can no longer be heard. But we have no intention of pulling over again, and Bob's friend is in the passenger seat with his phone, waiting for a signal to pop up. And at about mile 6, Bob's friend says he got full bars, and he hands the phone to Bob. And he calls a friend of his who is into the occult and well versed and educated in it. As we are driving, he describes what happened to the lady. Bob later told me his friend told him she believed it was the children of Hecate or something like that. I have no idea about what Hecate is, but it sounded like more of a guess to me. Anyway, as Bob is on the phone speeding out of the area, me and the 2 other people in the back seat all get chills at the same time, and they later told me that, just like me, the hair on the back of their neck stood up as a loud snapping noise comes from the front end of the car, and Bob's celebrity stops dead in its tracks and will no longer move forward. He tries everything, but the car is not moving. We later discovered a tie rod had snapped. Anyway, the friend Bob was talking to on the phone only lived about 20 minutes away from where we were, and they said they were on their way. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke, and after about 3 minutes we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We knew it was too soon for it to be Bob's friend, but me and Bob thought maybe we could get a ride from a local. So we all unloaded from the car and stood in front of it, waiting on the vehicle to hopefully stop. Now I cannot be certain, but my gut tells me I am correct. The vehicle doesn't stop. As it comes into view, a beat-up old pickup truck. It slows down, and in the truck are 2 men in their 30s to 40s with huge beards, and they stare at us and speeds up after passing by. I look at Bob, and before we can speak, he says what I was already thinking. "The guy's in the boat." Before I can say anything back, we see headlights coming from the direction the truck passed by just went. And we went still and quiet as the same guys in the truck passed slowly again, staring at us on the side of the road. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell and get here now, and hung up. 4 or 5 minutes go by and we see headlights coming. Relieved, we all get our stuff, thinking it's Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It was the lady who was coming to get us, telling Bob she took a wrong turn and is going to be about 10 or 15 more minutes. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror, as do I, as the same truck slowly passes by again, this time with only one of the boatmen in the truck. This time, though, the driver slows to a crawl and says, "Looks like you fellas could use some help," and then speeds up and drives off. This cemented the fact to Bob and I that we were definitely dealing with the boat guys. But where the hell did the other guy go? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat? And to make matters worse, at this point, something we had almost completely forgot about due to the boatmen was immediately reminded to us, as we began to hear laughter all around us, like before, and over the next few minutes it started getting closer and closer. I am almost pissing my pants as the sound is getting deafening and we have nowhere to run this time. And then from behind how a car off in the distance we see two sets of headlights coming on, two vehicles coming towards us slowly, side by side, taking up the entire width of the backcountry dirt road, both coming our way. The laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road we are stuck on, and the laughing seems to be zeroing in on us, as if hundreds or thousands of children are within reaching distance of us. There is no wind, no sound, other than the crunching of the tyres on the dirt road of the two vehicles slowly driving towards us. With a last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children and the headlights of the two vehicles, surely being driven by the boatmen, we are given a reprieve, as at this time, coming from the other direction, we see another set of headlights coming fast. We hold our breath. The laughter, the boatmen, what could be next? How will we get out of this? And that is when the vehicle that was coming fast pulls up, and it's Bob's friend. She unlocks the door on her car and rolls her windows down and begins to tell us to get in. When this happens, the two sets of headlights coming from the other direction turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my God, you weren't kidding about the laughing kids." She screams at us to get in, and we do. We begin to tell her about the boat guys, and she turns the car around, and no sooner than she starts to drive away, the two sets of headlights come on again, this time with their brights on, and they are about a car's length behind this car we are all crammed into. I yell at the driver, "Go, go, go," channeling my inner Jeff Goldblum, telling her faster, she must go faster. She floors it, and for about a mile the two vehicles stay on our ass. Then they turn off onto a side road. For about the next 2 miles after that, we can all hear the laughter still way off in the distance with our windows down. Then after 3 miles, the laughter was gone. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened, what the laughing children were, why the laughter followed us, if the boatmen were connected to all of this somehow, or if they were merely a coincidence that happened to terrify us at the same time as the paranormal stuff was happening. And if that was the case, why did they not react to the laughing children's sound? Is the lantern connected to the laughing children, or did Bob and his group mistakenly call forth the laughing children through their ritual? Like I said, this happened years ago, but I still feel just as terrified now when I tell people about it or think about it. I have constant chills and goosebumps as I have written this. I'm sorry for the typos and grammar issues, but I am a bit shaky as well. I'm going to post this story as is, and hope it's readable, and hope somebody who reads this and has a similar experience can share their story with me. In a weird way, I believe that would help me deal with the trauma this experience still causes me to this day. To all of you who think that the paranormal is just a fun hobby to get your thrills with, I beg of you, and I warn you, that we are not prepared for what is really out there. You can think nothing will scare you or harm you, but you are definitely dealing with unknown things. You have no idea how powerful or mundane the paranormal could be. If you use the paranormal as a thrill-seeking hobby, just use caution and always have your vehicle checked out beforehand. Oh, and watch out for seemingly sociopathic hillbillies and laughing children. Hope everyone who reads this sleeps well, but I know after telling my story like this for at least the next few nights, I will be getting no sleep at all. I'm editing my post at the moment, and I just remembered kind of an important coincidence. When we had driven fast away from the lantern in 2003, after it came swooping across the field towards us, the song Unforgiven by Metallica had been playing on the radio. And then in 2006, when we first heard the laughter, when we were by the hillside and jumped in the car, the same song was on again. This time on a mixtape that one of Bob's fellow Wiccans had made and brought along.
When I was a very young child, my parents rented an old German house. What made renting this house strange is that German families rarely rent out an entire house, especially to American servicemen and their families. The house is in 3 levels: the first floor, second floor, and the attic. The house was full of antique furniture. The service couple before us had moved out when their 6-month-old baby died of crypt death. So here we arrive, my stepfather, my mother, and me, 4 years old. The people that moved in upstairs were, and not disrespect intended, very low-class people. The wife's name was Cookie. There were 2 boys, and the father, whose name and face I cannot remember. One day, Cookie and my mother, born in the German countryside and still no furniture to unpack, decided to explore the attic and its treasures. In a very old dresser, my mother found one drawer filled with family photographs going all the way back to the turn of the century. Her and Cookie felt amazed at the certainly important heirlooms left in the house by its owners, the Hummels. In the next drawer, my mother found many crucifixes in many shapes and sizes. They were gorgeous works of art, my mother said. They came in many sizes and different wood. The strange thing about them was that they had death heads at the bottom of Jesus' feet. Death heads are the sign of the SS. The next day, Cookie and my mother began looking to make a playground in the barn for us kids to play in. They found a well-like concrete hole in the middle of the barn. Inscribed in the concrete were the words Rommel, 1943, and a swastika. What made this strange and even more scary was that in the courtyard was inscribed that the house belonged originally to the Schmidt family. My mother never allowed us to play in that concrete well. Soon after we all moved in, my mother and stepfather began hearing loud noises from upstairs, as if the furniture were being moved around. My mother thought that Cookie and her husband were trying to entertain us with the noises. The crucifixes began appearing all over the house. You would open a drawer, and there it would be. You open a closet door, and one would be hanging there. When my mother and Cookie were going to put them back, all the crucifixes would be moved to a different drawer. My memory and only memory of this time is when Cookie's son tried to scare me by taking me up in the attic and throwing dead mice on me. I heard them screaming as if someone were beating them. When they ran downstairs, I just had to see what scared them. I saw a little girl sitting on one of the ancient cedar chests. She was very thin and with little hair and very large brown eyes, and she was giggling. Ever since she was my imaginary friend. But the winds of change came. Cookie's husband was arrested for molesting me in the attic, an event that I can no longer recall. The accusations were very ugly, and I am glad that I do not remember. But the German police would not let him be tried by an American system, and arrested him under German law. Cookie and her sons moved out the next day in a fear of life move, for she was the one that turned him in. My parents and myself were going to move 2 days later, also in fear of life. It was those 2 days when my mother knew that Cookie wasn't the one moving the furniture in the attic, and wasn't telling ghost stories to amuse us, but was telling the truth. It all happened so fast that our furniture had arrived, yes, but we never opened a box. When we finally got to our new home and opened the last moving box, at the very bottom of the box was one of the most beautiful of the crosses, except for the one out of place death head. My stepfather took it and threw it away in a field, 2 hours of a drive away. What about the Hummels? They were such nice people, my mother said. She didn't want to ask about the antiques and family heirlooms. She figured there was a family member that they did not want to mention. What about the crosses? My mother found out that the crosses were strange, but the death's head was a sign of the SS. My mother also found out that there was a fairly unknown concentration camp nearby. It is possible that the house was commanded by an SS officer from a Jewish family. What about the children? Of the 4 children living in the house in 3 months, 1 died, 1 was raped, and 2 were subject to harsh discipline of a father that seemed to change in that house. What about the giggling girl? She stayed with me, I remember, until I received a fractured skull from a wild horse. On the way to the hospital, I remember she said she had to leave me. I cried more from her saying goodbye than I did from the 240 stitches I received. But if the horse had kicked me an inch lower, it would have broken my neck. An inch higher, I would have been blind for life. Was she my good luck charm? Was she a daughter in the Schmidt family long dead? Who knows?
So back in 2011, I worked at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington. Anyone who's worked at this Six Flags can tell you that some of the ghost stories they've endured. Mine possibly isn't a ghost story and could just be someone who had a lot of fun screwing with me. Anyway, while I was working there, it was part of my job to walk the track of my ride, a kids' ride called Mini Mine Train, and look for anything the riders had dropped or thrown over the fence during the day. It was always around 10 to 10:30 by the time I got around to doing this, and super dark. My ride had a couple of mine shafts. Imagine a house that the track runs through to make it dark for 2 seconds that I had to look through. One of my co-workers had mentioned a strange hill in the last mine shaft and that it seemed like a grave, so I decided to check it out. When I was in the little house, I easily found the mound of dirt, and on top of it was a hat. The hat was jacked up. It was absolutely covered in mud, and the top part was missing most of the fabric. It was a baseball hat, but it only had the stitches connecting the rim to the little dot on top, and the space in between looked like they had been burnt out. I thought it was strange, but I figured it was my co-worker playing a prank on me, so I took it with me and asked her if she had left it there as a joke. She was a little creeped out by the hat, and I told her it wasn't a big deal and threw it away, because who would want that hat? The next day we came back for our shift and laugh about how silly we were being. The day goes by like normal, and I go to walk the tracks again. This time I decide not to go through the mine shafts, but when I come up to the shaft with the little grave in it, I see the hat there, just outside the entrance. It was the same hat. There's no way someone else brought another hat that burnt, muddy, torn. I bring it with me again and ask my co-worker if she's playing a prank on me. She swears up and down that she isn't. So I figure maybe our supervisor saw me throw the hat and threw it back in there to make me take it to security. Lost items are taken to the security office so they can be given back to their owners. I take the hat with me to security at the end of the night, and they just laugh at me and tell me to throw it away. So I do. I don't see the hat for the rest of that year. The next year the park opens up and I'm put on a new ride. I'm working at the log flume, a small water ride, and I'm looking through the water trying to pull out the trash that's built up. That's when I see it. The same nasty hat is just floating there at my new ride a little over a year later. Maybe it's not a ghost, and maybe it's not anything, but I was really creeped out to have a freaking hat stalking me. First, let me start by saying that, as a child, I experienced a few odd occurrences in a house that my mother, sister, and I lived in, but nothing like what I am about to write about today. So here's the history. My daughter, who is 5 years old now, lives with her paternal grandmother. When she started living there, she lived in a 3-bedroom house with her grandmother, great-grandmother, and her great-uncle. About 3 weeks before she turned 3, her great-grandmother and her great-uncle died in the same house on the same day. Her grandmother and great-uncle got into an argument one day and things got really ugly. Her great-uncle said he would move out and move back to Chicago. Her grandmother, who has a bad temper and says things in the heat of the moment that when she thinks about later feels bad about, said she would buy his ticket. In the middle of the argument, the great-grandmother had a massive heart attack and died. Everyone was shocked. It was a sudden death. The grandmother, who I will call GM from now on, and her sister went to hospital with their mother, while the uncle stayed at home, supposedly to stay with Jane, my daughter. Well, he sent Jane over to his sister's house with her cousin, and he wouldn't even let her give him a hug. Keep in mind that she loved him, and he loved her dearly. As they were leaving, the grown-up cousin turned around and looked at the house. She saw her uncle looking out of the window, as if to have one last look at them. He then went into the GM's room, got the phone, put it in front, and then went back, got the shotgun, and locked her bedroom door. he went into his bedroom and killed himself. When GM and her sister got back to the house, GM rang the doorbell. She didn't want to look for her keys. When the uncle didn't answer the door, she got her keys and went inside. Since the uncle never left the house except to do yard work, it was odd. They called his name, but no one answered, so they went to his door, which was partially open, and saw him sitting in a chair, and they saw blood everywhere. So for the second time that day, they called 911, and an ambulance came to the house to pick up the dead body. Personal experience now. GM was taking her mother and brother back to Chicago to bury them, and I volunteered to stay in the house with Jane so she could get used to being there without GGM and her uncle. That way, when GM got back, she wouldn't have to deal with being there without and having Jane ask where they were and when they would come back. I got there on a Friday, and GM left. That night, weird things started happening. I was in the shower and I heard someone knocking on the wall in the hallway. So I got out and checked on my daughter to see if she had gotten up from bed, but she was fast asleep. So I went back to the shower and got back in, and I heard the knocking again. I got out and looked, but no one was there. Needless to say, I stayed out of the shower. After a while, I had to let the cat outside. The cat would only stay in the uncle's room, so I had to open the uncle's door to let the cat out. There was a spring latch high up on the door, so I could lock it so Jane couldn't get in there. I relatched the door and pushed on the door to make sure it was locked tight and that it wouldn't come open. After I let the cat outside, I went to the garage through the house door that connects and got my clothes out of the dryer. Then I went into the living room and sat on the love seat, which gave me a good view of the uncle's door and the front hallway, to fold my clothes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow pass from the other hallway, where the uncle's room and the bathroom in GM's room were located. It looked as if it went either into the kitchen or into the front hallway towards Jane's room. I got up to check on my daughter again, thinking she might have woken up and come out of her bedroom, but she was still asleep. I looked at my watch and realised that it was at this time every night that the uncle would come out of his room to give his mother her medication and give her some popcorn. The great-grandmother was diabetic. I then went back to the love seat and happened to look up at the uncle's door, which I had personally shut and checked to make sure it was locked. The door was standing wide open. I went to shut it again and locked it. By this time I was totally freaked out. I thought to myself that because I knew what had happened there, that it was just my overactive imagination. But then I heard my daughter talking in her sleep. My daughter is like me. Once she's asleep, she sleeps like a log. She does not move or make noises. I went in there to see if she needed anything. Once I stepped into the room, she shut up. I went back out into the living room, and then I heard this sound as if the wind were blowing through the house. I looked out the glass sliding door into the backyard, and there was no wind. So I talked to the uncle and told him to cut it out, that I was there to look out for the house and Jane, and that he was really starting to spook me. While I was talking, the wind sound was quiet, and when I stopped, it started up again. Then Jane started talking again. I freaked out and called my then boyfriend, who is now my husband, to come and get us. He came, and I put some clothes on and grabbed my daughter's blankets and all and ran out of the house. Jane kept saying that we had to go home because Uncle N was in the house, and he was scared because he didn't know what had happened to him. I told her that her uncle was in heaven with his mother and that he was not in the house. She insisted on going back, so we went back. My husband stayed with us for a week. Only a few other things occurred while I was there. I had the house blessed the next day, and after that I could feel a presence in the living room every now and then. He would pass by the couch that I was laying on and go to his mother's bedroom door. He would then come back by the couch, and if I was watching TV, he would stop at the other end just for a second, like he used to, just to see what I was watching. The day I cleaned his and his mother's rooms for GM, his TV turned on by itself. Keep in mind that I had unplugged the thing so the cat wouldn't mess with it. When I went into his mother's room, I felt really at peace. It was like she was there, saying that everything would be okay for me. We had always been close, and I loved her very much. Well, that is the end of my personal experience. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination, but that would not explain how my daughter would sometimes tell me something her uncle had told her while she was sleeping. So, big thanks to Sir Psycho for helping me out. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, go and check out his awesome channel. And thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.